My name is Faith Harrison, and I am 22 years old. All my life, I've desperately tried to earn my father's approval, but nothing was ever good enough. Today was supposed to be my proudest moment graduating college with honors. Instead, it became my greatest humiliation when my father stood up and shouted, "You're a leech, get out in front of everyone!" The shame was overwhelming, but something inside me finally snapped. I stood up and did something that left everyone completely stunned. It changed everything not just for me, but for everyone who witnessed it. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up for yourself when it mattered most. I grew up in a modest middle-class neighborhood in Boston with tree-lined streets and well-kept houses. My father, Thomas Harrison, was a successful businessman who worked his way up from nothing to become the regional manager at a financial firm. He was strict, demanding, and rarely satisfied with anything less than perfection. My mother, Karen, was kind and gentle, but she always yielded to my father's authority, never challenging his decisions or harsh words. My older brother, Jack, was 4 years ahead of me in school and seemed to be everything my father wanted in a child. Athletic, mathematically gifted, and interested in business, just like Dad. From my earliest memories, Jack could do no wrong in our father's eyes. When he brought home A's, Dad would take him out for ice cream. When he won baseball games, Dad would proudly tell everyone at work. Jack became the standard against which I was always measured, and I could never quite measure up. I was a different kind of child. Quieter, more introspective, drawn to books and art rather than sports and math. I remember being 6 years old and showing my father a drawing I had made of our family. He glanced at it and said, "That's nice, Faith. Now go do something useful with your time." That was the pattern of our relationship. My achievements were acknowledged briefly, if at all, then dismissed. In third grade, I won first place in the school science fair with a project about plant growth. I was so excited to tell my father, imagining he would finally be proud of me. When I burst through the door with my blue ribbon, he was helping Jack with algebra homework. "Dad, Dad, I won first place in the science fair," I exclaimed, holding up my ribbon. He barely looked up. "That's good. Did you beat any boys?" When I shook my head, his interest vanished. "Well, that's not much of an achievement then, is it?" I was 9 years old, and I remember going to my room and crying silently, not wanting him to hear and tell me to toughen up, as he often did. When I was 11, I learned that my father loved chess. He would play with Jack for hours, teaching him strategies and praising his good moves. I borrowed a book from the library and taught myself to play, practicing against computer programs until I was quite good. I finally worked up the courage to ask if I could play with them. "You wouldn't understand the game, Faith," my father said. "It requires logical thinking." "But I've been learning," I insisted. "I know how all the pieces move and some opening strategies." He sighed heavily, as if I was imposing on him, but agreed to one game. I played cautiously but well, even managing to capture several of his pieces. When I finally checkmated him, I thought he would be impressed. Instead, his face darkened. "Did someone help you cheat?" he demanded. "No, I learned from a book and practiced online," I said, hurt by the accusation. "Well, I was going easy on you," he muttered, standing up. He never played chess with me again. Throughout middle school and high school, the pattern continued. My straight A's were expected, not celebrated. My writing awards were dismissed as soft achievements. When I was selected for the prestigious statewide Young Writers program in 10th grade, my father's response was, "Writing stories won't pay the bills, Faith." Meanwhile, Jack was accepted to Wharton Business School, following in our father's footsteps. The celebration lasted for weeks. A special dinner, phone calls to every relative, and a brand new car as a gift. When it came time for me to apply to colleges, my father had one plan: I would attend the local state business school live at home and eventually join the family in the financial sector. But I had different dreams. My English teacher, Mrs. Blackwell, had encouraged me to apply to selective liberal arts colleges with strong writing programs. When the acceptance letters came in, including one from Westfield College with a partial scholarship, I was ecstatic. My father was furious. "You want to waste 4 years studying poetry and stories," he thundered at dinner. "What kind of job do you think that will get you?" "I want to be a writer," I said quietly. "Or maybe work in publishing." He laughed harshly. "Writers are broke, Faith. Is that what you want, to be a starving artist begging for handouts?" "Thomas," my mother interjected softly. Westfield is a very good school, and she got a scholarship. A partial scholarship, he corrected, which means I'm still paying for most of this foolishness. In the end, he reluctantly agreed to pay for Westfield, but not without making his disapproval crystal clear. When you're working at a coffee shop with your useless degree, don't come crying to me, he said, and I expect straight A's if I'm paying for this. The night before I left for college, my mother came to my room as I was packing. Your father means well, she said, sitting on my bed. He just wants you to be secure and successful. He wants me to be Jack, I replied. She didn't deny it. Instead, she squeezed my hand and said, just do your best, sweetheart. That's all anyone can ask. But I knew that for my father, my best was never going to be good enough. When I arrived at Westfield College, it felt like taking my first real breath. The campus was beautiful with ivy-covered brick buildings and massive oak trees. But more importantly, it was 200 miles away from my father's constant disapproval. For the first time in my life, I could just be Faith, not Thomas Harrison's disappointing daughter. My roommate Lisa was from California with sun-bleached hair and a perpetually positive attitude. We clicked immediately when she saw the books I was unpacking. Sylvia Plath, Virginia Woolf, Toni Morrison. She read off the spines. We're going to get along just fine. Orientation week was a whirlwind of activities, campus tours, and meeting new people. I found myself smiling more than I had in years. No one here knew about Jack the Perfect Son or my father's expectations. No one was comparing me to anyone else. Classes started, and I fell in love with college life. I signed up for creative writing, American literature, psychology, and art history. For the first time, I was studying what genuinely interested me, not what would look good on a transcript my father would approve of. In my creative writing class, I met Professor Diana Reynolds. She was in her 50s with silver-streaked dark hair and an intensity that commanded attention. After reading my first assignment, she asked me to stay after class. Faith, this piece has real promise, she said, tapping my paper. You have a distinctive voice. Have you been writing long? Since I was a kid, I admitted, but no one really took it seriously. Well, I take it seriously, she said firmly, and you should too. I'd like to see more of your work. That conversation was the beginning of a mentorship that would change my life. Professor Reynolds pushed me harder than any teacher ever had, but unlike my father's pushing, hers came with encouragement and genuine belief in my abilities. Midway through my first semester, I got my grades for midterms 3 A's and a B+ in psychology. I was proud of myself, especially considering how challenging the courses were. Then came the weekly phone call home. A B+, my father said, his voice sharp with disappointment. That's practically a C, Faith. What are you doing up there partying instead of studying? It's one of the toughest professors in the department, Dad, I tried to explain. The class average was a C. I don't care about the average. I care that I'm paying thousands of dollars for you to be mediocre. After that call, I cried for hours. Lisa found me curled up on my bed, eyes swollen. Families can be the worst, she said, sitting beside me. My mom's the same way about my weight. Nothing's ever good enough. Lisa's understanding helped, but the next blow came soon after. My father called to say he was reconsidering his financial support if I couldn't maintain a perfect GPA. Maybe this liberal arts nonsense isn't working out, he said. You could transfer to state for the spring semester live at home and save me a lot of money. The thought of going back home, of giving up my newfound freedom and passion, was unbearable. I knew I needed to find a way to support myself, just in case. The campus bookstore was hiring, and I managed to get a part-time job working 15 hours a week. The pay wasn't great, but it would cover some expenses if my father followed through on his threat. Between classes, studying, and work, I was exhausted, but also determined. In the bookstore, I met Jordan Miller. He was a junior studying environmental science, with curly brown hair and kind eyes. He came in regularly, usually looking for obscure scientific journals. We started talking about books, then moved on to movies, music, and eventually our families. My dad thinks science isn't practical enough, Jordan confided one slow afternoon. He wanted me to be a doctor or lawyer. My dad thinks anything that isn't business is a waste of time, I replied. He calls my writing my little hobby. Jordan became a regular fixture in my life. We'd study together in the library, grab coffee between classes, and eventually our friendship evolved into something more. He was the first person who seemed to value me exactly as I was, who thought my writing was important and my dreams were valid. At the end of my first semester, despite the job and the relationship, I managed to pull my psychology grade up to an AI. My overall GPA was 3.9, which I hoped would be enough to appease my father. It wasn't. An A is not an A, he said during our holiday phone call. Jack never got anything less than an A his entire first year. I gripped the phone tighter. I'm not Jack, Dad. That's becoming increasingly obvious, he replied coldly. Going home for Christmas break was tense. My father spent most of the time talking to Jack about his internship prospects and business school professors. When he did address me, it was to question my choice of major, my job at the bookstore. Minimum wages for people without ambition, faith. And my relationship with Jordan. What does his father do? By the time I returned to Westfield for spring semester, I was more determined than ever to prove myself on my own terms. I threw myself into my writing, spending hours crafting stories and essays. Professor Reynolds continued to mentor me, introducing me to visiting writers and recommending books that expanded my horizons. In April, I submitted a short story to the college's literary magazine and was shocked when it was not only accepted but featured as the opening piece. When the issue came out, Professor Reynolds presented me with a copy. "This is just the beginning, Faith," she said. "You have real talent." I sent a copy home, hoping for some acknowledgement from my father. My mother called to say she had read it and thought it was lovely, but my father never mentioned it. As my freshman year came to an end, I felt both proud of what I had accomplished and anxious about the future. I had proven to myself that I could succeed on my own terms, but my father's financial support still hung over me like a sword ready to fall. Little did I know that the next 3 years would bring even greater challenges and ultimately lead to that fateful graduation day when everything would finally come to a head. I started my senior year at Westfield with a mixture of excitement and dread. Excitement because I was finally in the home stretch of my college journey, taking advanced writing seminars and working on my senior thesis. Dread, because with graduation looming, the pressure from home was intensifying. The summer before senior year had brought an unexpected change. Jordan, who had graduated in May, accepted a job with an environmental nonprofit in Seattle. We tried to make long-distance work with phone calls and video chats, but by October, we both realized it wasn't sustainable. Our breakup was amicable but painful. He had been my support system for nearly 3 years, and suddenly I was facing my most challenging year without him. "You knew he would leave eventually?" my father said dismissively when I made the mistake of mentioning the breakup during a phone call. "Those environmentalist types are never reliable. Now maybe you can focus on making some practical plans for after graduation." Those practical plans, according to my father, involved giving up on writing, moving back to Boston, and taking an entry-level position at a financial services company, where one of his golf buddies was a manager. "It's time to grow up, Faith," he said. "Playtime is over." I held the phone away from my ear, breathing deeply to calm myself. At 21, I was hardly a child, and my writing was not playtime. I had published several pieces in literary magazines, by then received outstanding evaluations from professors, and was consistently at the top of my classes. But none of that mattered to Thomas Harrison. What my father didn't know was that Professor Reynolds had encouraged me to apply for the Winters Writing Fellowship, a prestigious postgraduate opportunity that provided a stipend and mentorship for a year, while the recipient worked on a book-length manuscript. It was highly competitive, with applicants from top universities across the country. "You have as good a chance as anyone," Professor Reynolds assured me when I expressed doubts. "Your portfolio is exceptional." I worked on my application in secret, not telling my family about it. I knew my father would dismiss it as another way to avoid real work, and I couldn't bear to hear him belittle something that meant so much to me. Meanwhile, I poured myself into my senior thesis, a collection of interconnected short stories about family dynamics and identity. Many of the characters and situations were inspired by my own experiences, though carefully disguised. Writing them was both painful and cathartic, allowing me to process years of feeling inadequate and misunderstood. As winter settled over campus, my mother called one evening. This was unusual, as our family calls were typically scheduled on Sunday afternoons, with my father doing most of the talking. "Faith, honey," she said, her voice lower than normal. "I wanted to check on you without your father around." "Is everything okay, Mom?" She hesitated. "Your father is concerned about your plans. He's been talking to Mr. Daniels about a position for you at Liberty Financial, and he's expecting you to accept it." "But he hasn't even asked me if that's what I want," I protested. "You know how he is." She said a phrase I had heard countless times throughout my life. "He thinks he's doing what's best for you. By completely ignoring what I want." Another pause. "He says you've been resistant to his advice for too long. He's growing resentful of paying for a degree he thinks is worthless." The conversation left me feeling sick. Graduation was only months away, and instead of being excited, I was dreading it. While my classmates were celebrating their accomplishments and looking forward to the future, I was preparing for a confrontation that seemed increasingly inevitable. In February, I received an email that changed everything. I had been awarded the Winters Writing Fellowship. Out of hundreds of applicants, they had chosen me. The email praised my writing sample as showing exceptional promise and offered a stipend that, while modest, would allow me to support myself for a year while working on my manuscript. I stared at the email for a long time, joy and apprehension battling within me. This was exactly what I wanted: a validation of my talent and a path forward as a writer. But I knew my father would see it as a direct rejection of his plans for me. I decided not to tell my family immediately. First, I needed to finish my thesis and get through final exams. Then I would figure out how to break the news. The next few months passed in a blur of writing, editing, and studying. My thesis advisor called my final draft publication worthy and encouraged me to submit it to small presses after graduation. My final grades were all A's, putting me on track to graduate with high honors. My father, meanwhile, continued to make plans for my future without consulting me. During our weekly calls, he would mention meetings he had scheduled for me with colleagues or apartments he thought I should look at in Boston. "Dad, I haven't agreed to any of this," I finally said during one particularly frustrating conversation. "Agreed to what?" "Having a real job, being a functioning adult," he snapped. "You've had 4 years to play make-believe faith. It's time to join the real world." Then, as graduation approached, the logistics became another source of tension. My father was reluctant to discuss travel arrangements or where the family would stay during the ceremony. "I don't see why we need to make such a fuss," he said. "It's just a piece of paper." My mother, in another of her private calls, assured me they would be there, but warned me that my father was in a mood about the whole thing. Lisa, who had become my closest friend at Westfield, could see how stressed I was becoming. "You know," she said one night as we sat in our dorm room, "you don't have to do what your dad wants. You're an adult. You can make your own choices." "It's not that simple," I replied. "He's paid for most of my education. He thinks that gives him the right to decide my future." "That's not how it works," Lisa insisted. "That was a gift, not an investment with returns." I knew she was right, but years of conditioning had made it hard for me to stand up to my father. Every time I imagined telling him about the fellowship, about my plans to pursue writing seriously, my stomach knotted with anxiety. The week before graduation, I received the official letter confirming the Winters Fellowship, along with details about the program and the first stipend payment. It felt real now, a tangible opportunity, rather than just an email that could be dismissed as insignificant. As I packed up my dorm room, carefully placing the fellowship letter in my document folder, I tried to imagine how the graduation weekend would unfold. I pictured my father grudgingly proud, perhaps finally seeing the value in what I had accomplished. I imagined introducing him to Professor Reynolds and having him understand why writing mattered so much to me. But a small, honest part of me knew those were fantasies. Thomas Harrison had spent 22 years making his expectations clear. He wasn't going to change overnight. What I couldn't have anticipated was just how dramatically things would actually unfold, or how a moment of public humiliation would become the catalyst for the most important stand I would ever take. Graduation day dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect spring morning that seemed designed for new beginnings. I woke early, too nervous to sleep, and stood by the window of my dorm room watching the campus come alive with activity. Staff members were setting up rows of white chairs on the main lawn, and the stage where we would receive our diplomas gleamed in the morning sun. "Today's the day," Lisa said, joining me at the window. How are you feeling? Terrified, I admitted, but also proud. I did this, Lisa. Despite everything, I made it. She hugged me tightly. Hell yes, you did. And no one can take that away from you. We spent the morning getting ready with our other roommates, doing each other's hair and makeup, taking dozens of photos in our rooms and around campus. For a few hours, I managed to push aside my anxiety about my family's arrival and just enjoy being with friends who had become like sisters to me. At 11, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. We're here. Checking into the hotel. See you at the ceremony at 1. No mention of my father's mood, which I took as a bad sign. If he was being pleasant, she would have said so. By noon, I was dressed in my graduation gown, the blue and gold honors cords draped around my neck, my cap carefully positioned. Lisa and I walked together to the assembly area where graduates were gathering, joining the excited crowd of our classmates. There they are, Lisa said suddenly, nodding toward the growing audience on the lawn. I followed her gaze and spotted my family. My mother in a floral dress looking anxious, as she often did in public situations. Jack in a business casual outfit checking his phone, and my father standing stiffly in a dark suit, his expression already set in a familiar look of impatience. I should go say hello, I said, though everything in me wanted to avoid them until after the ceremony. Want me to come with you? Lisa offered. I shook my head. Better not. I'll see you back here in a few minutes. The walk across the lawn felt like crossing a minefield. Other families were embracing their graduates, taking photos, presenting flowers. My father's rigid posture offered no such welcome. Hi, Mom, Dad, Jack, I said, approaching them with a forced smile. You made it. My mother immediately hugged me. You look beautiful, sweetheart. So grown up. Jack gave me a quick side hug. Congrats, sis. Nice cords. My father merely nodded. The traffic was terrible. Is this going to take long? About 2 hours, I said, my heart sinking at his tone. There are around 400 graduates. He checked his watch. We have dinner reservations at 6. That should be enough time. No congratulations, no acknowledgement of my honors status, no indication that this day meant anything to him beyond an inconvenient obligation. I should get back to the assembly area, I said, desperate to escape. They're strict about the processional order. We'll see you after, my mother said, squeezing my hand. As I walked away, I heard my father say to Jack, At least your graduation was for a useful degree. I rejoined Lisa with tears threatening to spill. She took one look at my face and understood. Don't let him ruin this, she said fiercely. This is your day, not his. The ceremony began with the traditional pomp and circumstance. As we processed to our seats, I spotted my family in the audience about halfway back. My mother waved. My father was already looking at his phone. The college president welcomed everyone, followed by the dean of students and the commencement speaker, a Westfield alumna who had become a successful journalist. Under different circumstances, I would have been inspired by her speech about finding your authentic voice and having the courage to tell important stories. Instead, I was too distracted by my father's visible restlessness, the way he kept checking his watch and sighing loudly enough that people around him were giving him looks. Finally, it was time for the conferring of degrees. We would walk across the stage as our names were called, receive our diplomas, and return to our seats. Simple, dignified, and hopefully quick enough to prevent my father from completely losing patience. The graduates from the art department went first, then business, then communications. As English department graduates, we were in the middle of the pack. I watched as Lisa crossed the stage to enthusiastic cheers from her large family. Then it was my turn. Faith Elaine Harrison, Bachelor of Arts in English with high honors, the dean announced. I walked onto the stage, heart pounding but smiling. This was my moment, the culmination of 4 years of hard work and personal growth. I shook the president's hand, accepted my diploma, and turned to walk back to my seat. That's when I heard it cutting through the polite applause like a knife. You're a leech, get out, my father's voice loud and clear. A waste of my money. The applause faltered. Heads turned toward the disruption. I froze in place, diploma clutched in my suddenly numb fingers, as a wave of humiliation washed over me. The college president stepped forward, concern on his face. Are you all right, Ms. Harrison? He asked quietly. I nodded mechanically, unable to speak, and somehow managed to walk off the stage. My vision had narrowed to a tunnel, and there was a rushing sound in my ears. I was vaguely aware of whispering around me, of shocked faces and pitying looks. I found my seat and sat down hard, staring straight ahead as tears threatened. Lisa, sitting a few rows ahead, turned to look at me with horror and sympathy. The ceremony continued. More names were called, more applause, but I heard it all as if from underwater. All I could think about was my father's voice publicly declaring me a leech, a waste. All I could feel was the culmination of a lifetime of never being good enough, never measuring up, always being a disappointment. And somewhere beneath the humiliation and pain, something else was building. A slow-burning anger that had been suppressed for too long. A realization that this public shaming, was the final straw. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. I stood when told to stand, sat when told to sit, moved my tassel from right to left with the rest of my class. When it was over and the recessional music began, I remained seated while my classmates filed out, many giving me concerned glances as they passed. Lisa hurried back to me as soon as she could. "Faith, my God, I can't believe he did that. Are you okay?" I looked up at her, surprising myself with how calm I suddenly felt. "No," I said honestly, "but I think I'm about to be." I sat on the white folding chair while the graduation lawn emptied around me, people streaming toward the reception area where champagne and hors d'oeuvres were being served. Lisa stayed by my side, along with a few other close friends who had witnessed my father's outburst. "Do you want us to walk you back to the dorm?" my roommate Jennifer asked. "You don't have to face them right now." I shook my head slowly, my mind replaying not just today's humiliation, but a lifetime of similar moments. My 10th birthday, when my father had criticized my excitement over a new art set. My high school graduation, when he'd complained about having to sit through the ceremony just to see me get a meaningless diploma. Christmas mornings when my carefully chosen gifts for him were set aside with barely a thank you. "This is never going to stop," I said more to myself than to my friends. "Unless I stop it." "What do you mean?" Lisa asked, concern evident in her voice. I looked up and saw my family making their way across the lawn toward us. My mother looked mortified, my brother uncomfortable, but my father's face showed no remorse. If anything, he looked irritated, as if I had somehow embarrassed him rather than the other way around. "Do you mind giving me some space?" I asked my friends. "I need to talk to my family alone." They hesitated, clearly protective after what they'd witnessed. "I'll be okay," I assured them. "Really?" As they reluctantly moved away, I thought about Professor Reynolds' words from our last meeting. We had been discussing my thesis, which dealt heavily with a character finding her voice after years of emotional suppression. "You've written about claiming your own story," she had said. "Now you need to live it." I stood up as my family approached, straightening my shoulders and taking a deep breath. For the first time in my life, I felt absolutely clear about what I needed to do. "Faith," my mother began, her voice strained. "Your father didn't mean to—" "Yes, I did," my father interrupted. "Someone needed to say it. 4 years and thousands of dollars for what, a degree in reading books? You've been leeching off me long enough." Several nearby families glanced over, uncomfortable witnesses to his continuing tirade. "Thomas, please," my mother whispered. "Not here." "Why not here?" he demanded. "She's had 4 years of playing pretend. Time to face reality." I watched him, strangely calm now. The fear and anxiety that had defined our relationship for so long were being burned away by a new certainty. "Are you finished?" I asked, my voice steady and louder than I'd intended. My father looked taken aback. I rarely interrupted him and never challenged him directly. "Because if you're done," I continued, standing straighter, "I have some things to say." "Faith," Jack began, but I held up my hand. "No, for once, all of you are going to listen to me." My voice was shaking slightly, but not from fear, from conviction. "Dad, thank you for showing everyone here exactly who you are. You just saved me years of trying to explain to people why I have such a complicated relationship with my family." His face darkened. "Don't you dare speak to me that way." "I'm not finished," I said, surprised by my own boldness. "For 22 years, I've tried to earn your approval. I've worked hard, gotten good grades, tried to make you proud. But nothing was ever enough because I wasn't Jack. I wasn't studying business. I wasn't following your plan. People were definitely watching now, a small crowd gathering at a respectful distance. I spotted Professor Reynolds among them, her face showing both concern and something like pride. You call me a leech, I continued. But here's something you don't know. I won the Winter's Writing Fellowship. It's extremely competitive, and it comes with a stipend. Starting next month, I'll be financially independent, working on my first book with professional mentorship. My father's expression flickered between disbelief and anger. Some artsy charity handout. It's a merit-based fellowship, I corrected him. They chose me because I'm talented, because my writing has value even if you can't see it. I reached into my gown pocket and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a check my father had sent as a graduation gift, the only time he'd ever given me money without strings attached. I held it out to him. I'm returning this. I don't want or need your money anymore, and I won't be taking the job at Liberty Financial or moving back to Boston or following any other plan you've made without consulting me. My mother gasped softly. Jack stared at me with wide eyes. Faith, honey, think about what you're saying, my mother pleaded. I turned to her, softening my tone slightly. Mom, I love you, but you've enabled this for years. You keep saying that's just how he is, as if it excuses everything. It doesn't. He's emotionally abusive, and you've let it happen. Her eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't stop now. And Jack, I said, turning to my brother, you've benefited from being the favorite, and you've never once stood up for me. You've watched him tear me down my entire life and said nothing. Jack had the grace to look ashamed. I didn't realize, you didn't want to realize, I corrected him. It was easier not to see it. I turned back to my father, who was now red-faced with anger and embarrassment as our audience had grown. I forgive all of you, I said, and meant it. But forgiveness doesn't mean allowing the same patterns to continue. From now on, I decide what success looks like for me. I decide what path I take. If you want to be part of my life, it will be on new terms with basic respect and boundaries. My father finally found his voice. You ungrateful. I'm grateful for the financial support you provided for my education, I said firmly. But it was a gift, not an investment that gives you control over my life. I've earned my success here, and I'll continue to earn my own way forward. I took a step back, physically and symbolically creating distance. I'm going to celebrate with my friends now, people who actually support me and value what I have to offer. You're welcome to join us if you can be respectful. If not, I'll be in touch when I'm ready. For a moment, there was complete silence. My father's face cycled through shock rage, and finally a dawning realization that he no longer had power over me. My mother was crying quietly. Jack looked like he was seeing me clearly for the first time. I turned and walked toward my waiting friends, each step feeling lighter than the last. Behind me, I heard a sound that took me a moment to identify applause. It started with Professor Reynolds and spread. Parents, graduates, even some faculty members clapping in support of what they had witnessed. A woman I didn't know, presumably another student's mother, stepped forward and touched my arm. That took tremendous courage, she said quietly. My daughter has been dealing with similar issues with her father. Thank you for showing her it's possible to stand up for yourself. Several other parents approached with similar comments. One father told me he was rethinking how he spoke to his own children after witnessing what had happened. My friends enveloped me in a group hug as I finally reached them, the emotions of the day catching up with me at last. I was shaking, but not from shame or fear, from the powerful realization that I had finally claimed my own voice, my own story. I can't believe you did that, Lisa whispered. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen. Looking over her shoulder, I saw my family still standing where I'd left them. My father turned abruptly and walked away toward the parking lot. My mother hesitated, then followed him. But Jack remained watching me thoughtfully, as if seeing a completely different person than the sister he thought he knew. In that moment, surrounded by genuine support and free from the weight of my father's expectations, I felt something I had rarely experienced in my family's presence: peace. That evening, instead of the tense family dinner my father had planned, I celebrated with my friends at our favorite restaurant near campus. Professor Reynolds joined us raising a toast to Faith, who showed us all what real courage looks like. For the first time in years, I felt completely present, not anxious about saying the wrong thing or disappointing someone. The relief was so overwhelming that I slept through the night without waking once, something that hadn't happened since before college applications began. The next morning, my phone showed missed calls from both my mother and Jack, but nothing from my father. I wasn't ready to talk to any of them yet. I needed time to process what had happened and what it meant for our relationship going forward. I was packing up the last of my dorm room when there was a knock at the door. To my surprise, Jack stood in the hallway looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Maybe get coffee." 20 minutes later, we sat at a small table in the campus coffee shop, an uncomfortable silence between us. "I didn't know," Jack finally said, staring into his cup. "Or maybe I did, but I didn't want to see it." "See what?" I asked, though I knew what he meant. "How Dad treats you. How different it is from how he treats me." He looked up, meeting my eyes. "Yesterday was eye-opening. I've never seen him like that in public." "He's always been like that," I said quietly. "You just weren't paying attention." Jack winced. "You're right. It was easier not to notice." He hesitated. "What you said about the fellowship, is that real?" I nodded. "It's very real, and very competitive. Only 4 people got it nationwide." A look of genuine admiration crossed his face, something I'd never seen directed at me before. "That's incredible, Faith. I had no idea you were doing so well with your writing." "How could you? No one in our family ever asked." The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours. Jack apologized multiple times, and while I appreciated it, I made it clear that words weren't enough. He needed to demonstrate change through his actions. To my surprise, he agreed. "I'm not sure what my relationship with Dad will look like going forward either," he admitted. Seeing him that way, it made me question a lot of things. As we parted, Jack hugged me. A real hug, not the awkward side embrace I was used to from him. "I'm proud of you, sis," he said, "for standing up for yourself, for the fellowship, for all of it." Those words from my brother meant more than I expected. They were a first step toward healing a relationship that had been damaged by years of our father's favoritism. That afternoon, my mother called again. This time I answered. "Faith," she began, her voice thick with tears. "I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything right now, Mom," I told her. "But I meant what I said yesterday. Things need to change." "Your father is," she trailed off. "Let me guess. Angry hurt, claiming I'm the one who embarrassed him." Her silence confirmed my suspicions. "Mom, I love you," I said gently. "But I can't keep pretending everything is okay when it isn't. Dad has been emotionally abusive my entire life, and you've allowed it. That has to stop." To my surprise, instead of defending him as she usually did, she said, "I know. I've known for a long time, but I didn't know how to change it." It was the first time she had ever acknowledged the truth of our family dynamic. We talked for nearly an hour, and while nothing was resolved, it felt like the beginning of a more honest relationship. 2 weeks later, I moved into a small apartment with Lisa in the city where the Winters Fellowship was based. The program began with an intensive summer workshop, and I threw myself into it completely. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who took writing seriously, who understood its value and importance. During those early months, I also started seeing a therapist. Dr. Melanie helped me process the years of emotional abuse and begin to understand that my father's treatment of me wasn't my fault. I hadn't failed to earn his love. He had failed to give it freely as a parent should. "Your worth isn't determined by his approval," she reminded me in our sessions. "You're rebuilding your sense of self based on your own values, not his expectations." My mother visited me that summer, coming alone for the first time I could remember. We had lunch in a cafe near my apartment, and she seemed different, less anxious, more present. "I've started counseling too," she confessed. "After what happened at your graduation, I realized I needed to make some changes." "And Dad?" I asked cautiously. She sighed. "He refuses to consider therapy. He says there's nothing wrong with him, that you're the one who needs help." She reached across the table to squeeze my hand. But I know that's not true, and I'm working on being stronger on not enabling his behavior anymore. I was proud of her for taking those steps, even as I recognized how difficult change would be after decades of established patterns. 6 months after graduation, I was in a coffee shop working on my manuscript when I looked up and saw my father walking through the door. He was in town for a business conference, but I hadn't expected to see him. We hadn't spoken since graduation day. He spotted me immediately and walked over, his expression unreadable. "Faith," he said stiffly. "Dad," I replied, surprised by how calm I felt. The sight of him no longer filled me with anxiety or dread. "What are you doing here?" "Business meeting nearby. Your mother mentioned you frequent this place." He stood awkwardly for a moment. "May I sit?" I gestured to the chair across from me, closing my laptop. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "You look well," he finally said. "I am well," I replied. "The fellowship is going great. My mentor thinks my manuscript has real potential." He nodded, a familiar skepticism in his eyes. "And financially, are you managing?" "The stipend covers my basic needs. I also picked up some freelance editing work that helps." He seemed to be waiting for me to ask for money or admit to struggling, but I had nothing of the sort to offer. Finally, he said, "Your mother misses you." "I miss her too. We talk weekly, and she visited last month." Another uncomfortable silence. "Faith, what happened at graduation?" "Was honest." I finished for him. "Painful, humiliating, but honest. You showed exactly how you feel about me and my choices." His jaw tightened. "You embarrassed me in front of all those people with your speech." And there it was. No apology, no acknowledgement of his behavior, just concern for his own embarrassment. "Dad, I don't expect you to understand my choices or even approve of them," I said evenly. "But I do expect basic respect, the kind you'd give to any adult. I haven't asked you for anything since graduation, and I don't plan to." Our conversation lasted just 15 minutes. Nothing was resolved. No grand reconciliation occurred. But as he left, I realized something important: his opinion no longer defined me. I could sit across from him without shrinking, without desperately seeking approval I would never receive. That realization was profoundly liberating. A year after graduation, my writing career was gaining traction. I had published several pieces in respected literary journals, and my fellowship manuscript was nearly complete. My mentor had introduced me to a literary agent who had expressed interest in representing me. My mother continued her own journey of growth, setting boundaries with my father that I never thought possible. She visited me regularly and took a genuine interest in my writing. On her third visit, she brought a box of my childhood journals and stories that she had saved without my knowledge. "I always believed in your talent," she told me. "I just didn't have the courage to say so when your father was being critical." Jack and I were rebuilding our relationship too. He called regularly, and we discovered common ground we'd never explored before. He admitted that his own relationship with our father had become strained since my graduation. "I started noticing things," he explained during one of our calls. "The way he talks to his employees, to Mom, even to me when I don't agree with him. It's like you opened my eyes." I had begun mentoring younger writers through a community program, finding unexpected fulfillment in helping others develop their voices. Many of them came from challenging family backgrounds, and I found that my own experiences helped me connect with them in meaningful ways. Looking back on that graduation day, I now see it as the moment everything changed, not just for me, but for my entire family. My father's public outburst and my response broke open the carefully maintained facade we had lived behind for years. The journey hasn't been easy. There have been painful conversations, tears, and setbacks. My relationship with my father remains complicated and limited, but for the first time in my life, I'm defining success on my own terms, setting boundaries that protect my well-being, and surrounding myself with people who value me for exactly who I am. The greatest lesson I've learned is that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply tell your truth. Standing up for yourself doesn't require grand gestures or perfect eloquence, just the courage to say enough and mean it. Breaking generational patterns of emotional abuse isn't just healing for yourself, it creates ripples that can transform others. My mother found her voice. My brother gained new perspective. Even some strangers who witnessed my stand that day were moved to reconsider their own family dynamics. I still have the diploma from that day framed on my wall, not just as a symbol of academic achievement, but as a reminder of the moment I finally claimed my own story. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who constantly put you down? How did you find the courage to break free from harmful patterns in your relationships? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Remember, your voice matters, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is use it. Thank you for listening to my story.